everybody. My name is Kevin Stapleton. I see some familiar faces. That's always nice to see. But I am an economist with the Vermont Department of Labor in something called the Economic and Labor Market Information Division. And what I'm going to talk about today is basically the status of the labor market and job search and how we can move forward, both in terms of finding meaningful employment for your clients, but also in how do we navigate the changes in the labor market that have come about because of the pandemic. And in just a second here, I'm going to turn it over to a presentation. And once I put the presentation on my other screen, I lose the ability to see you, and I lose the chat box. So, oh wait, I have to admit somebody here. Oh, there we go. So the only problem with not being able to see anyone is, well, one, it's weird to be talking to my computer, of course, but by now, in the middle of this pandemic, I'm pretty used to that. But also, it means that I can't see people if they raise their hand or figuratively raise their hand or whatever. So please, please, please don't hesitate to take yourself off mute and chime in if along the way in this presentation you see something that raises a question, or if you have questions. I'll also try to set aside some time at the end to answer any questions people might have. Oh, it looks like we still have some people coming in. Let's give that one more minute. While we're waiting for a couple people, does anyone have questions already? Anything? I see a lot of familiar faces. That's nice. We've still got people rolling in. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start. And like I said, we'll leave some time for questions at the end, but please don't feel obligated to, well, please feel free to interrupt me. Don't feel obligated to sit quietly if you have a question. I'm going to share my screen over here. I think I'm going to share my screen over here. No, I'm not. What happened? As I was saying earlier, Karen, this is basically the beginning of every Zoom meeting. Let me get my screen share to work right. There it is. Hopefully now you are seeing my presentation. Play from the start. Can somebody speak up and say if you can see all that okay?
Yes, sir, Kevin.
Very good. All right. So now that we have the technical glitches out of the way, as I said, I'm going to take a few minutes here and then we'll leave some time for questions at the end. But we're talking about navigating the labor market. And navigating the labor market has changed a lot in the past 8 months because the pandemic has really had, A, it's had a huge impact on the labor market, but B, it has really changed in many ways the way employers go about looking for talent. And we'll talk about that as well as we move through here. But part of what we're always asked to do as economists now, everybody wants to know what's going to happen in the labor market as we go forward, especially during this pandemic. How quickly are we going to recover? When are we going to get the jobs back? And the bad news, well, the good news is that there are a lot of highly paid economists out there who will make wild predictions about how quickly this thing is going to bounce back. I'm not one of those. I'm a moderately well-paid economist whose job is not to make wild claims about where we're headed, but try to give people indications, small nuggets of information to help us understand where we're headed. When we're talking about a global pandemic, economists can provide information, but as it says at the bottom of my slide here, I'm not an epidemiologist. And epidemiologists need to lead us out of the pandemic so that economists can start making those decisions again about where the economy is headed. Really, we can only predict with the information we have, and epidemiologists and public health officials will play a larger role by far than us in figuring out where the economy is headed from here. But just as some brief background, whoops. My division in the Department of Labor is called the Economic and Labor Market Information Division. We're part of labor, but we are federally funded. 100% of our funding comes from two agencies, really: the Employment and Training Administration, who pays for us to speak to folks like you, and also the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the primary labor economics data house of the federal government. And our job is really to produce data, to explain the data, and disseminate economic data across the state of Vermont for people who can use it. And hopefully we find some useful data in here. Any questions about any of that before I move ahead? So for the rest of the time here today, we'll start by looking at the pandemic and how that has impacted it. If you follow economic data at all, or even if you don't, you're probably well aware that the pandemic has had a tremendous impact on the economy as a whole and on the labor market. So we'll look at that, but then we'll also look at things that have not changed and really the job search question and what that looks like these days. So while the mechanics of searching for a job has changed, what employers are looking for has not, and we'll talk about that as we go. But let's first look at how the pandemic has impacted the economy as a whole. We're going to start by looking at unemployment insurance claims. Most of you are probably aware that if you work for a company that's part of the unemployment insurance program, which is 80% or 90% of all people who work in Vermont, and you get laid off, you can file a claim and continue to be paid some portion of your salary as an unemployment insurance claim. It's an insurance system that everyone paid into who worked for a firm that is part of the unemployment insurance program. And when you are laid off, you can file that claim and receive that money as a benefit. And typically in Vermont, most of the time that doesn't involve a pandemic, the state of Vermont will have 200, 300 claims per week. In a given week, there might be 300 people who have lost a job and decided to file an unemployment insurance claim. Traditionally, this number, while it fluctuates a little bit based on the time of year, so when ski areas closed, we get a lot of unemployment insurance claims. When summer hiring is done, we get a lot of, or summer jobs are done, we get a lot of unemployment insurance claims. But generally we have, like I said, 200, maybe 500 a week. If you go back to February, you might remember February was right before the pandemic started. We had a couple hundred initial claims each week, 500 initial claims maybe. And as you can see on the green bar here, the green bar is continued claims. That's the number of people each week who are actually accessing the benefit. So who filed a claim in the past and are still being paid. And as of March, early March, that number was 4,000 or 5,000. It hovered around that amount, and that's typical, normal. And then starting in late March, we start to shut the economy down. And I don't probably need to remind anyone of this, but basically every restaurant and every non-essential retail store closed, schools closed, college students went remote. And when all of that happened, we see a spike in unemployment insurance claims. So that during the last recession, the one that started in December of 2007, we never had more than about 15,000 claims being processed, 20,000 claims being processed at any one time. By the end of April, we had 75, almost 80,000 claims being paid during the pandemic. So the 80,000 claims is about 25% of the labor force in Vermont. So about 1 in every 4 workers in Vermont was filing an unemployment insurance claim. Numbers that have never been seen before and hopefully will never be seen again. You can see there that by the end of May on 5/23, that number had declined a lot down to 50,000. It has continued to decline since then. And the next slide looks at some of that. If you look at this upper left where it says regular unemployment initial claims, 13-week trend, you see that by July, the number of claims filed each week continued to go down and down and down. Where we have some concern is that after a long decline, we've reached what seems to be a bit of a plateau, where between August and now, the number of claims each week is still very elevated and does not seem to be going down much at all. In other words, we seem to have sort of a new equilibrium with a high level of claims. And you can see that in this red circle here. Last year, during comparative weeks, we had 280 claims. This year, we've had 600. And that 600 number has been pretty consistent. And it's really, if you're a pessimist and you're looking for areas of concern, that's a really big concern, that the regular UI claims have not gone back down to normal levels, but seem to have plateaued at a higher level. And if you're a pessimist, then the distribution of the claims is also a concern. As you can see on the chart on the right there, this is a percentage of all claims by industry. And what's concerning about this is simply that at the beginning of the pandemic, almost all of the claims were in services. And now the distribution of claims now looks a lot like the distribution of claims did a year ago. We just have a lot more claims. It is spread out across industries much more broadly than it was at the beginning of the pandemic. So the decline is seen across the entire economy now, and this increase in claims rate remains spread across all the industries. Before I go on, does anyone have any questions about any of that information? Okay, now we'll talk about employment. And when we talk about employment here, for purposes that are not important here, we talk about what's called total non-farm payroll employment. But this program divides up employment into industries and says how many people are employed in this industry and how many people are employed in manufacturing, how many people are employed in food service. If we look at the beginning of the pandemic, we can see, and this is probably not a surprise to people who have been following this very closely, but accommodation and food services lost almost 60% of the jobs that existed in that industry. 18,400 out of about, I think it was 35,000 jobs. So half of the jobs in that industry have disappeared, and they're coming back, but very, very slowly. Retail trade lost almost 8,000 jobs. And the bigger concern about retail trade is that it lost all of these jobs at a time when it was already bleeding jobs very badly. So the concern about retail trade is that what we've really done, the concern at least, is that we might have just accelerated a trend that was already in place. And so there's some real concern about whether those jobs will come back at all. The other thing that's interesting to note here is that one of the biggest areas of loss was healthcare, because in our attempts to focus on COVID and protect people, we shut down dentist offices, we shut down all elective surgeries. Most doctors' offices closed and went to telework that didn't require as many staff. So we had somewhat counterintuitively, we had a large decline in healthcare at a time when we were in the middle of a pandemic. And again, if these jobs were coming back quickly, it would be less of a concern. And things did come back very quickly at first, but over time, this is every industry in Vermont. These really deep lines here are things like construction. The blue and the green here are not construction, I'm sorry, retail trade, uh, accommodation and food service. These fell dramatically. These other industries did not fall as far. Everything bounced back fairly quickly in May, but the rate at which we are gaining jobs back now is much slower. And so that it's kind of the rate of gain is tapered off, and we're still down about half the jobs we lost. So the good news is that we are gaining, we did gain a lot of jobs back. The number of people who were unemployed went from about 60,000 to about 25,000, which is pretty tremendous progress in a short period of time. It's the fastest growth we've ever had, but the hole we dug was so deep that that it's hard to climb out of that. We're already starting to see a tapering off of the gains. So there's a question as to when we will ever get back to where we were. Any questions about that before I move on? So when you look at unemployment, and this is not a surprise to anyone, the unemployment rate spiked during the heart of the pandemic. That's this number here. This is split into people 20 years and over, the red line, and people 16 to 19. 16 to 19-year-olds always have higher unemployment rates than older people. So, but if you're working with young people, the pandemic hit them harder than older people, in large part because people 16 to 19 tend to work in industries that were hit the hardest. But as you can see, it spiked, and now it's coming back down. The actual published unemployment rate in Vermont is now 4.2 or 4.3%. It's the published rate is back down to almost pre-COVID levels, but that is in large part because the labor force is so much smaller. So many people have left the labor force altogether and therefore are not included in the unemployment rate. To be considered part of the unemployed, you have to have sought work in the past 4 weeks and be willing and able to accept a job. And the number of people in that situation has declined dramatically. A lot of people have left the labor force altogether. The next slide I want to talk about pertains primarily to youth. It's this labor force participation rate. And I just want to take a second to walk you through what this is. The labor force participation rate is the percentage of all people in that cohort, in this case, young people aged 16 to 19-year-old, who are either working or actively seeking work. You can see the pink line is the not seasonally adjusted number, and it spikes, and every spike there is just summer employment for teens. And then it falls back down by the winter, and then it goes back up every summer. But the interesting thing to note here is that for a lot of us, if you were a teenager in the 80s or even the 90s, about between 50 and 60% of all teens had a job in the 80s and most of the 90s. That number began to fall really precipitously around the year 2000, and now that number is about 35%. And the reason I bring this up is because that has a profound impact on the labor market in obvious ways. There's fewer people in the labor market, but also in slightly less obvious ways, which is people looking for work for the first time tend to be older than they were in the past. And so employers are having to teach job skills to older people that they used to teach to 16 and 17-year-olds. People are coming in to the labor force at an older age, higher skilled jobs because they've been to school, they've been to college, whatever, they've been to a trade school, but they have not learned the basic skills required to hold a job. The showing up to work on time, the being prepared to work, the critical thinking skills involved in an entry-level position. So this has had a large impact on the labor market. And you see this in surveys of employers who say things like, we can't find staff who can meet these basic skills. And it's because, in large part, it's because teens are doing other things rather than working in the earliest years of what used to be their work life. Does anybody have a question about that before I?
Yeah, this is Britain. I was just curious, you sort of spoke to this, but why? Like, what other things?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Britton. That's a great question. I was
Teed it up for us.
Yes, I teed it up to see if anybody would. So there's a couple factors here. The most obvious factor is that the percentage of kids going to college or post-secondary ed of any sort, but mainly college, is much higher. So therefore, the percentage of kids who are working is lower, even though a lot of kids work in college. So that is one factor. Another factor that's a little more subtle is that when you think about, let's say you're 17 and you expect to do some sort of post-secondary ed. When I was a kid, when I was 17 or 18 or 19 and starting to go to college or whatever, I could work a job in the summer and throughout the year if I wanted and make enough money to put a reasonable dent into what it was going to cost me to go to college. So that there was some benefit in me working in terms of my ability to get a college degree. That's really no longer the case in large part because minimum wage is very low, and that's what most people are working. That's the rate most people are being paid for entry-level positions. So the pay is very low, and the cost of going to college has become a lot more expensive. So therefore, spending time working isn't actually doing much to support your college. So young people are doing other things to support college or not. But these days, you're probably better off spending your time looking for scholarships than you are stepping into a restaurant to make, well, in Vermont, $10.50 an hour. So that's, I think, one of the big factors as well. Also, there's a really simple just wealth effect here that we are, it doesn't always feel like it, but as a nation, we are much wealthier than we were in 1985. And as a wealthier nation, we have the privilege of sending people to the workforce later in life. Does that answer your question, Britton?
Yeah, definitely.
Good.
Thanks.
Okay. So in the next 10 minutes, I want to look ahead just a little bit and then talk about some resources we have. First of all, looking ahead, as I said earlier, is pretty impossible right now. There's a lot of uncertainty. And so instead of making predictions, we'll talk about where the uncertainty comes from. First one is consumer sentiment. The largest driver of the economy is consumer spending. And when people look into the future and are afraid of the future, they don't spend money, they save. So that's consumer sentiment being bad. When consumer sentiment is high, when it's good, people are more likely to spend money to buy houses, to buy durable goods, to buy new cell phones, whatever it may be. So we don't really know where consumer sentiment is headed because it's so heavily reliant on the getting the pandemic under control or getting to a place where the pandemic's not a concern, which feels like 2025 maybe. But anyway, government ordinances, if we have to shut down again, and it looks like in some areas that might be the case, that plays a large role in making the economy worse. It's a necessary evil. Business failures. So when this pandemic hit, we had this PPP program, Paycheck Protection Program, and other programs that help support businesses and employees to keep them alive, to keep the employees safe, and to keep the businesses alive through the pandemic. But at that time, we did not expect the pandemic to still be raging in October, November of this year. So a lot of those programs are running out. And there's a real question as to whether these businesses will be able to survive. And there's a common concept in economics of creative destruction that when one business fails, another one can come along, tap into those resources, make it better, and reopen that business. And this is a fine enough idea in the long term, but it takes a lot of time. And we don't have a situation where we can allow that many businesses to fail and let creative destruction do its thing. Which brings us to a stimulus package. Probably not a surprise, but Congress has been trying to create this stimulus package for a long time and has not succeeded. Not succeeded yet. Doesn't look like it's going to come before the election. Who knows what happens after the election? And then, of course, the spread of the disease, which is really the cause of all this uncertainty, right? So, so that's all the uncertainty we see. But there are a lot of things, and this is what I want to take the next few minutes to talk about. There are a lot of things that haven't changed. And while we have to find employees and find employers in a different way than we have in the past, the fact is that the basic hierarchy of needs for an employer haven't changed. At the base of this hierarchy is a whole lot of jobs for a whole lot of people where the job requires a basic level of competency, reading, writing, basic math, the ability to work well with others and follow instructions, the ability to show up on time and ready to work. These are entry-level positions. If you bring that level of skill to a position, your wages match that. So a position that requires a low level of skills will pay a low wage. And it doesn't matter what your skill set is. Your wage is based on the skill set required to hold that position. So there are people out there with PhDs and law degrees who are accepting these level 1 positions, right? But as you gain skills, you move up this pyramid. Most industries need fewer people with more skills, but those skills pay higher wages. And you can see that not just in this mocked up little graphic we've made, but also in a better mocked up little graphic that the Bureau of Labor Statistics has made. And this is, on the left-hand side, you'll see the level of educational attainment from less than a high school diploma through a professional degree and a doctoral degree. And this is basically saying the same thing that the last slide said, just using data to prove the point. If you have less than a high school diploma in Vermont, well, it was national data, but if you have less than a high school diploma nationwide, your median weekly earnings are $553. If you're working with high school students and you want to encourage them to finish high school, just finishing high school will get you an additional $180 a month in the median. It doesn't automatically bump your salary, but the median wage goes up by about $180. Getting that associate's degree adds another $130, and a bachelor's degree adds another $200 or $300 to that. Which is to say that you're gaining a more and more highly specialized set of skills that has value to employers. And the other thing you're doing by continuing your education through finishing high school, finishing an associate's degree, finishing a bachelor's degree, is that you're widening your opportunities of the types of jobs you can take, you could accept. And in doing so, you're driving down the unemployment rate, you're driving down the likelihood that you will find yourself unemployed. People with a bachelor's degree, the unemployment rate in 2018 was 2.2%, whereas people with less than a high school diploma, it was 5.6. All of those seem great right now because it went so high. But the point is that working with young people, we talk about skill acquisition, and gaining a small amount of skills can pay off in large ways as you progress through the labor market. couple last things. When we talk to employers, and we survey employers, and this is a part of a nationwide survey. And if you ask all employers, what are the attributes you're looking for the most? What are the skills and knowledge you need the most? You know, there's an engineering firm out there that needs a high-level R programmer and a guy who can build micro devices. But overall, what employers are looking for are people who can show up on time to work, who have critical thinking skills, problem-solving skills, customer service skills. And when I talk to young people, I encourage them, before you go for an interview for a job, or when you're writing a cover letter, or when you're trying to speak to someone about a job, it's not enough just to say, hey, I'll show up to work on time and I have problem-solving skills. The key is to demonstrate that you did that. If you're a high school student and you want to demonstrate that you're going to show up on time, ready to work, then an employer might want to know that you've been on time for school every day for the past whatever it might be, that you are rarely sick, that you're ready to work. And in this environment, in the current environment, one thing we're finding is that employers are far more flexible than they've been in the past around accommodating needs that people might have. So there was a time when everybody thought there's no way I could ever work from home because my employer doesn't allow that. Or there's no way that this accommodation could be met. Employers are so much more open to that now because the entire world has changed in terms of people's work environment. So they're much more willing to entertain these conversations about what accommodations do you need. And a lot of Vermont employers really need employees right now. And they're willing to make these accommodations more now so than ever. So I encourage people to talk to young people about what accommodations they might need and how we could meet those. I wanted to briefly touch on the fact that there's a new version of this Pathways brochure. I think by now most people have probably seen the old editions of this one. There's a new one that is just now being rolled out. I'm not going to spend any time talking about this because I think most of you have probably seen it, and those of you have not, we can talk more about it offline. But there are other resources available, and again, you might be aware of these. But for example, on our website, www.vtlmi.info, which they'll provide that after the presentation, there's videos on basically every career, and students can learn about, like, what does it actually mean to do this job. There's also on our website a host of resources, My Next Move, getmyfuture.org. These are basic career exploration sites that help students try to figure out, based on their interests and their experience, what might be a good career path for them. Finally, because I want to wrap up in time for any questions people might have. Right now, as an economist, like I said, there are economists out there who will make predictions, but we're not in that business. There are too many unknowns to know exactly what's going to happen in the global economy, primarily because of the pandemic, well, almost exclusively because of the pandemic. But the skills of yesterday that we used to talk about, showing up to work on time, problem-solving skills, critical thinking skills, those haven't changed. And those are going to be, there are some highly technical skills that are changing over time. You know, we need Tableau programmers and we need coders, but that's a very small portion of the labor force. For the most part, we need people who are going to meet those basic skills to find work in the labor market. And as always, as data-driven people, we are strong believers that more information, better information, leads to better decisions. We have lots of data that hopefully can help people navigate the labor market, understand their options, explore ideas, and have a data-driven process for approaching the labor market. And you can find a lot of that information at our website, www.vtlmi.info. I promise I'm not paid to repeat that over and over. One last thing, if you go to our website, in the upper right-hand corner of our website, you will see a button that says, help us serve you better, complete the survey. If after this presentation, you want to tell Michael Harrington, Department of Labor, to never let me present again. Or if you want to share any feedback you might have about this presentation, you can go to the survey there and fill that out. We appreciate any feedback you might have. We've got about 3 minutes. Does anyone have questions? Anything I can address? I'm not sure if I put you to sleep or if we're all good.
No, lots of good information, Kevin. Thank you very much. You sure your crystal ball's not working? Because that's what everybody wants to know.
Well, that's yeah. We don't we don't have crystal balls, and I hate to say it, but other economists don't have crystal balls either. Nobody likes to hear it, right? But it's up to the epidemiologists. When they can tell us exactly when a vaccine is going to roll out and when people are going to get vaccinated, and or when we get control of this some other way, which it appears we've given up on, then we can start to look at what the market's going to look like. But until then, it's really hard to understand, really hard to estimate where we're headed. We've seen some tremendous growth. It's really, the bounce back in the beginning was tremendous, way above our expectations, which is when we decided we'll no longer have expectations. And then, but it's slowed since then, and that's really what gives us concern. And I'm realizing now that I don't have my background on, and you all have been staring into my basement. Sorry about that.
Kevin, can you hear me?
Yes.
Kevin,
Yep.
you had mentioned early in the conversation that people have opted out of, the workforce. What does that mean? Are they aging out, or?
Yeah, no. So that's a good question, Pam. In an hour and a half presentation, I would have gone into some detail there. But just real quickly, people have been aging out of the labor force, but that's a secular sort of long-term trend. During the pandemic, there's an odd disconnect because the survey we use to calculate the unemployment rate requires someone to have looked for work in the past 4 weeks. If you have not looked for work in the past 4 weeks, you're not considered unemployed. So a large part of the reason the labor force has gotten smaller is because we removed the work search requirement from unemployment insurance. It used to be that if you wanted to collect unemployment insurance, you had to actively seek work. Due to the pandemic, that requirement was removed, but our methodology has not changed. So there's a whole bunch of people who, quote unquote, quit looking for work. They did quit looking for work, but that's because we told them, don't look for work right now, right? Or you don't have to look for work right now.
Oh, so the percentage then is lower because there's less, you're dividing into less people.
Yeah. So if the work search requirement returns, we'll probably see the labor force grow again. Whether we'll see the total number of unemployed people increases, another question.
Kevin?
Yeah. Yes.
I know there's a focus in our country on people having a college education. A lot of the students that we work with aren't really college oriented. And I wonder if we might, as a nation, become more interested in people who go to trade school, and if there's any information about their success rate.
So I can't speak to broadly to the impact of trade schools. We do hear all the time. I think it's pretty well accepted at this point, and I don't want to get out of my lane here, but I think it's pretty well accepted that we went a little overboard with this idea that everyone needs a 4-year education. We do know that trade schools, if you look at electricians and plumbers, construction workers, these are very highly paid, very stable jobs. I mean, construction has some ebb and flow, but they're, for people who go to trade school, get an apprenticeship in being an electrician or something like that, there are a lot of great opportunities out there that pay more than a lot of people with 4-year college degrees will ever earn. And we have been trying to encourage people to consider trade schools as well. They're an important option for people who don't want to do a 4-year degree, or for people who just know what they want, and that's a trade school.
Do you have any statistics on that that we can show to students so they can see that that is a great opportunity for them?
Yeah, let me, I don't have them. Let me make a note here. And I will get that information for you. Is that Pam talking?
Marlena Hughes.
Oh, Marlena. Okay, Marlena, I will try to track that data down and provide it to the group so that they can provide it to you. Or you can reach out to me directly. My email is just kevin.stapleton, STAPLETON, at vermont.gov. But I will do my best to get you that information, whatever I can find.
Thank you.
It is a critically important option. I just want to stress that. Without the data in front of me, I can tell you it's another one is welders. We can't produce enough welders right now, and they're very, very highly skilled, great jobs, and the state and nationally, we can't produce them fast enough. So anyway, okay.
You know, Kevin, this is Kathy, and that's interesting that you say that, because I am a voc rehab transition counselor, and working with my students in the Rutland area, I have not been able to find someone willing to do an apprenticeship for students.
Yeah,
and
so
yeah, working with the apprenticeship person here too.
right. So part of the problem with moving people through apprenticeship programs is that you need people willing to participate in the program, and
Right.
especially in a small, relatively rural state, there's just that. All I can say is that I understand that struggle and it's real.
Yeah.
We need to find a way. We need to try to find a way to encourage businesses to take on that. You know,
Yeah.
to let them see that it's part of it's in their long-term interest to participate in this. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. We are over time. I'm going to have to cut this because I have another one starting in about 1 minute. But my information is available. Ask anybody who planned the conference. They know where to track me down. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions, if you want more information, or if you're a host of some other program and you would like someone like me to come in and talk. Any last second things? Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.